Is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this evening to announce that I introduced some legislation today dealing with the calamity that we have found at our airports with TSA. Something has to be done. Everybody's fed up. The people are fed up. The pilots are fed up. I'm fed up. You know, I've come to this floor many times over the past many years and complained about the terrible foreign policy we've had, the terrible monetary policy we had, the excessive spending and the debt, and also the tax policy. But what we're doing and what we're accepting and putting up with at this airport is so symbolic of us just not standing up and saying enough is enough.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Co-host today, Daniel McAdams, is with me here in Lake Jackson.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Well, doing well, and good to see you. And also, we have a special guest, a friend of ours and a friend of libertarianism. Jim Bovard is here with us. He's been writing about libertarian thinking for a long time. He's a lecturer. He gets a lot of stuff in USA Today. He's a great civil libertarian in particular. Jim, welcome to the Liberty Report.
Hey, Ron, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate the chance to join you and Daniel.
Well, very good. And obviously, with that introduction, I think the viewers realize we're going to talk a little bit about TSA, and a little bit of that has been motivated by the disaster approaching here with the mobs that will be at the airports today. And this has been something, of course, that I've agitated about for a long time, especially when those bills were being passed in the Congress. It narrowed down to, and I'm sure you remember it was narrowed down whether it should be private-run companies under the auspices of the government or the government itself. It wasn't much of a choice because not many of the congressmen were willing to say, well, the responsibility ought to be on the airline. So I know you've kept up with this issue very well, and you've written recently about this. So tell us how frustrated you are. Could you possibly be more frustrated and aggravated by the TSA than I?
Well, personally, I've always tried to be an optimist, but on some subjects it's really difficult. No, it's fascinating. The TSA keeps getting worse. Last year on the campaign trail, Donald Trump called it a total disaster, and a lot of people thought that he'd make it better after that, but he hasn't. It's actually gotten a lot more intrusive thanks to some of the new guidelines TSA is using. And, going back to the question of private versus federal, a huge difference with a private company is that the people searching you, the people following you, would not have the equivalent of diplomatic immunity. It's almost impossible to sue a federal agent who violates your constitutional rights. And that's a huge Pandora's box for not getting abused at the airport, because federal agents, the TSA agents, know that they can, grab you here, squeeze you there, and it's like, tough luck. There was a lawsuit that's coming down. A federal judge just approved it a few months ago. It's an airline pilot who got jammed in the groin, punched in the groin basically, by a TSA agent out of Dulles Airport. And TSA tried to get the federal judge to dismiss his lawsuit. They said his rights were violated. TSA said that instead of filing suit, what the guy could have done is simply called into the TSA contact center and left a complaint. This is the type of remedy that TSA thinks the American people deserve after they get heavily abused by federal agents.
Jim, Daniel has a question for you.
Well, a question and a comment. I flew last weekend, Jim, to D.C. and back, and I can tell you it's much, much slower. They're taking much more time, but it also seems like there are many more workers, but they're just all milling around, doing nothing. I was lucky because I always opt out. It's very sad because when it first started, you had the chance to opt out. There were quite a few people opting out. Now nobody does. I'm the only one. My kids ask me, why do you do this? I say, because I can at least. I at least still can. But I walked through the metal detector and ding, and the fellow said, well, you've been randomly selected for a search. Is that fine? And I said, no, it's not fine, but I guess you have to do it anyway. And of course, by saying that, I triggered all sorts of people to come over and say he's refusing his search, and it's just become so ludicrous, Jim.
Yeah, that's that's a good experience. Some people say the TSA acronym stands for 1,000 standing around. They have all these employees. One of the last times I flew was coming back on Thanksgiving Day 2015 out of Portland, and I had time enough. I got to the airport early, so I opted out. And it was a routine, pat down. And then all of a sudden, the TSA agent said that I triggered their explosive alarm, something on my baggage had. And I said, well, it wasn't like I was hanging out at a missile range or going target shooting. And so I was marched off to a private room, and 3 different TSA agents were there, and one was very, very aggressive, and it basically felt like he was trying to turn my family jewels into a pancake. And I filed a complaint about that. I wrote several stories, did a FOIA request. And the thing that probably triggered that, and the thing that's going to get a lot of people hammered today, was that I'd used hand sanitizer before going through the checkpoint. And hand sanitizer has glycerin. And according to the very unreliable test that TSA uses, that's enough to trigger an explosive alert. I mean, I didn't look like a terrorist. I didn't have any. Well, okay. Some people think I look like a terrorist, but okay, let's put that aside. But I mean, there was no reason to do groin pounding, which is basically what they did on me, and it's something that they'll do. They're probably going to do today to a lot of other people, a lot more worse than what I got, and for no good reason, because you use hand sanitizer, hand cleanser, anything that has glycerin can trigger their stupid explosive alerts. And they have never caught an airline bomber with these explosive tests, but they still use them to march people off and give them the 3rd degree.
Jim, every time they do some testing, TSA comes out very poorly. They don't prevent anything. They cause a lot of trouble. They undermine our liberties. But don't you think it would be reasonable to put them in the category of a security industrial complex? It's money's behind all this. Some of this stuff, when it comes out that they're failing their tests, what did the congressman say? Right now they're saying more equipment, more money. We don't have enough money. We want 3D scanners, and we want CT scanners. And this stuff's expensive. So it has to be that there's money behind this this whole project as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of money, and there's such gross negligence by Congress. I mean, this is the kind of thing that Congress should be marching. There's year after year TSA grossly fails these undercover tests done by by TSA or other federal agencies, and and for a brief period, congressmen piss and moan, and then give them a higher budget. It's almost like every time the TSA screws up, TSA uses that as a pretext to even worse abuse American travelers. This is what's happened with the guidelines this year, which are more intrusive and more intimate. The current guidelines, the new ones, are so extreme that TSA actually warned local police departments to expect people to call up and complain they'd been sexually assaulted after a TSA search. And you have these de facto sexual assaults, and TSA still doesn't find the mock bombs and explosives. And it's disappointing to me to see how many Americans put up with this stuff, because there are folks like Daniel, you and I, who are outspoken and do everything we can to stop this nonsense. But it's interesting chatting people up in TSA lines. There are folks who say, yeah, this is BS, and there's others like, shut up, this is keeping me safe. I'm thinking like, wow, this is, okay, it's no longer 1776.
Jim, you had the piece that Dr. Paul referenced earlier, and we thankfully reprinted it at the Ron Paul Institute website, but it's a great article. It came out perfect timing. This is the biggest travel day of the year. I hope many people read it. But you had, in addition to a couple of horror stories that you told in the piece, there were a couple of bright spots dealing with immunity, losing immunity, and that sort of thing. Maybe you can give us a little bit of hopeful optimism.
Yeah, there was going back to this pilot, James Lindler, who's filed a lawsuit in federal court, and it's actually moving forward because a lot of people have tried to sue about these these searches which violate Americans' Fourth Amendment rights to be free from a warrantless and unreasonable search, they filed suit. They've all been dismissed until this one. And this is moving forward. And there was a federal judge who certified it. And the federal judge's initial decision back in July was great because it had such disdain for the arguments that TSA and the Justice Department used. I mean, the federal judge said that, no, it's not reasonable for a federal agent to assume that he could get away with, punching a traveler in the groin for no reason. I mean, a reasonable federal agent would know that, TSA was saying. This is a type of mindset that TSA brings to court, and it's a type of mindset that would let almost any agent do almost anything to any American. And that's a complete travesty of the Bill of Rights.
As early as the Magna Carta, there was an effort made to make sure the king and the governments were under the same rules and laws that the people were under, which is a very good idea, and it's persisted, and our founders recognize this. But this is what has been totally lost, and hopefully this court case you're talking about will change this, is that individuals, if they would do what we see pictures of, what these TSA agents are doing, I mean, they would be put in prison so fast, and they're totally exempt. And and I don't think anybody can argue that the TSA agents are pure and they're trying to save us from a nuclear attack or something like that. That it's just disgraceful what we tolerate. But I did want to ask you one thing about this groin searching. I doubt if they ever found any type of a weapon by groin searches. Are you aware of anything that, my goodness, it's a good thing that we do groin searches, because guess what we were able to save us ourselves from?
I'm not aware of any kind of anything that they have found that was worthwhile looking for. There was a case in Denver, the TSA in Denver. There were a couple of gay agents there who were, set up a system which they could, if some guy was traveling who they thought was attractive, they would trigger a false alert and then take him aside and kind of, enjoy pawing him. It's interesting to think, going back to what you said about the rule of law and equal treatment, if Donald Trump had to go through the typical TSA line twice a week, TSA would not survive his tweets for 2 weeks because he would feel, okay, this is BS and I'm going to put a stop to it. And Trump does have sufficient authority that he could yank in the reins and yank in the reins hard in this agency. He hasn't done it, and at this point, it's his responsibility. This is BS that was started by George Bush, made worse by Obama, but now it's Trump's responsibility. And lots of the commenters of the USA Today article were very angry at me for blaming Trump on this, but he's president.
Right.
This is the bottom line, Jim, and this is from your article. You point this out to anyone who says, but they're making us safer. This is it. The Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General appeared before Congress, as you write, and he said that the screeners failed to detect mock threats. I think he said in the neighborhood of 80% of the time. So they're not keeping us safer, right?
Well, it could be worse. It could be 85. No, I mean, this is what's happened again and again. There was a test by the IG Inspector General, I think, in 2015. It came out that they'd failed 95% of the time, and so TSA invoked its failures to become far more intrusive and punitive to American citizens who are traveling. And that's what's happening this year, and it's still failing 80%. And so much of what TSA does makes no sense at all. And this is an agency which is both a farce and a menace. And it's important for people not to bow down simply because the TSA agents have snappy uniforms with those epaulets on the shoulder, which the taxpayers paid for, and now they're supposed to bow down to.
Well, you were talking about what percentage have they been correct on, 75, 85, 90% on these tests, and obviously they're not very good at it. They're failing too often. But one thing that they're very good at is they're 100% on the side of saying a violation of liberties. It always violates personal liberties. And I think this comes from, you might comment on this, is what the role of government ought to be. This is making the assumption that the government's role is mainly to make us very, very safe, completely 100% safe. And the chairman of the committee and the Congress said, that is our goal. That's why we need more money and more equipment. We have to have 100% safety. Now, it would be great that we do, but there's no proof. There's actually proof that the opposite works. When you depend on the government, you're less safe. If you depend on the ownership and the responsibility on the company, I keep using as a reference here where we live. We live just a couple miles from huge chemical plants, and they're very secure because it's private. But depending on government to make us 100% safe, I think is the mistake that leads to all these other mistakes that the politicians make, and even the people go along with it, especially after 9/11. And Daniel remembers that we would get calls. Ron has to give in a little bit because we have to give up our safety. We have to give up our liberties to be safe.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And unfortunately, there's no one who's going to make Americans safe from TSA agents.
There you go.
But going back to that period after 9/11, I have memories of some of the speeches you gave on the House floor. I mean, I think that was your finest hour, and it was great that you stood up, and it was great that that someone in Congress, aside from some of the hardcore leftist types who were very good on civil liberties sometimes, someone aside from them was standing up from a principled constitutional side. Another point I've made, and it's really pissed people off about as far as making airports and airlines safe is. The thing that's happened is the U.S. government is far more effective at making enemies than at protecting the American people. If we had a less interventionist foreign policy, we would have much fewer threats here at home.
We'll need to wind this down now, but I think Daniel has one more comment or a question for you.
Yeah, just a final one, and that's amen to that last point, Jim, for sure. But I don't know if you're that comfortable commenting on this, but as I mentioned when we started, there are less people that are opting out, less people are challenging it. You see people in the line, it's just like drones, they know what's coming. And what can we do you think, to wake people up, to get them in the spirit of resisting this again?
Well, I don't know if you're good at magic tricks. No, I mean, this is a question I wrestled with my writing in general for a long time. It's like, it seems as if the BS from the federal government and the brazen abuses of Americans' rights has become clearer and clearer almost every year, and there's been no real, fundamental pushback. There's some individuals, some groups, this, that, and the other, and it does make me wonder how many Americans still give a damn about individual liberty. But flip side is that TSA makes it obvious what happens if people don't have rights and liberty. What happens is you're doing a simple trip, and then you get federal agents squeezing your butts and your boobs for no good reason.
Like you, Jim, I look for places where we can be a little bit optimistic, but I am thinking to myself as we face these kind of problems that if the people don't wake up and do something about the TSA being so symbolic and so many people exposed to this might shift me over to thinking, well, I guess I better take a period of time of pessimism until we renew this interest in liberty. But Jim, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. And if you have a final comment, and also a place where our viewers can get in touch with you, and whether or not you have a website.
Yeah, website is www.jimbovard, that's BOVARD.com. I'm on Twitter at Jim Bovard, and if you search Google News, you'll probably see some recent articles and lots of people who hate my stuff.
Well, once again, thank you very much for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate that.
All right. And I want to thank our viewers for joining us today, and please come back soon to the Liberty Report.